I'm Delilah Tran, 34, a marketing analyst and the only unmarried cousin on my dad's side. It was early summer, and the family barbecue was already in full swing by the time I arrived. The sun painted everything in gold picnic tables draped in checkered cloths, foil trays steaming with ribs, children racing barefoot across the lawn. Laughter bubbled over from the direction of the beer cooler, where uncles had already gathered, beers in hand and stories too loud. I was walking up the driveway with my Tupperware of caramelized onion dip silly, but it was always my contribution when I heard it. She'll probably show up late, alone, with another one of those store-bought salads. A snort. Then someone said, "Nah. She's too fancy now. She'll bring hummus and pretend it's homemade. They didn't notice me yet." "Still no man, though," came the final punchline from Aunt Teresa's razor voice. "At this rate, we'll be throwing a retirement party before a wedding." Laughter. It wasn't cruel. Not in the way strangers are cruel. This was the casual, unthinking cruelty that only family can perfect, woven into smiles, softened with inside jokes. I stood still, dip in hand, the heat catching beneath my dress collar. The smell of charcoal and sweet corn filled the air. I watched a dragonfly hover near the grill smoke and thought of just turning around, leaving. But I didn't. I walked the rest of the way up. No one turned to greet me, not even when I slid the dip next to the coleslaw. "Hey, Delilah." I looked up. My cousin Angela barely glanced away from her phone. She was scrolling TikTok beside her new fiancé, who didn't even lift his head. "Oh, you made it," Uncle Gary added distractedly, still focused on the brisket. "Yeah," I said. "I brought the onion dip." Came a reply. Vague, non-committal. I went to the cooler and bent to grab a LaCroix, the silence hanging like invisible mist. A small boy I didn't recognize ran past, chasing bubbles. He crashed into my leg and kept going. I turned to Teresa, who was now fussing with the table settings. "Do you need help setting up?" She blinked, as if she hadn't noticed I'd spoken. "Oh, we're fine. Honey, just enjoy yourself." I didn't feel welcome. I felt like a backdrop, like an extra in a play I used to star in. If you've ever been to a family gathering where your name fades into the background noise, where your smile feels forced and your seat feels colder than the rest, drop a comment or let me know where you're watching from. Hit like or subscribe if family drama ever made you feel invisible too. I sipped my drink, lingering near the grill, pretending I was busy looking at the burgers. That's when I saw my chance. Across the yard, near the garage, my cousin Jamie was telling the same joke again. Something about me and my corporate cat lady lifestyle. People laughed, loudly this time. I moved away, down the side of the house. My heart was doing something odd tight, but not quite sad. More like calculated. That's when I texted him, "You close." The reply came fast, "Just pulling up. Where should I park?" I peeked around the hedge and saw it. The car. Sleek. Quiet. Impossible to ignore. "Just come down the driveway. I'll walk you in." I met him halfway. He was taller than I remembered from the office no-tie today. Just a fitted navy blazer and that casual, clean confidence. His hair slicked back just enough to match, sunglasses tucked into the collar. He looked like money, like control, like every man in his family had once tried to impress. "Ready?" he asked, that knowing glint in his eye. I nodded. We walked side by side. People noticed. Heads turned. First Uncle Gary, then Jamie, then Teresa. By the time we hit the grass, Angela had put her arm up. I said softly, "I hope it's okay I brought a guest." There was a moment. No one spoke. Then Teresa, blinking fast, is that? He extended his hand smoothly. Nice to meet you all. I'm Mark Hastings. I used to be Delilah's boss. Now, well, let's just say she's doing quite well for herself. He smiled. That charming CEO smile. Silence. Even the grill crackled quieter. Angela whispered something to her fiancé. He looked at me for the first time, and in that single moment I felt it. The shift, the stunned hush, the eyes locking onto me, the invisible curtain falling. Mark was still smiling as he shook Uncle Gary's hand. My uncle, who normally didn't stand for anyone, got up from his lawn chair like a schoolboy meeting a senator. I watched the small movement of his hand brushing his shirt before the handshake like he wanted to look a little more presentable. Suddenly, self-conscious. It's a pleasure, Uncle Gary said, grinning wide. Likewise, Mark said smoothly. I stayed a step behind him, watching the room, the yard pivot like it was on a track. Heads leaning in, jaws resetting. Nobody was quite sure what game had just started, but they all knew something shifted. It was like watching a forest stop moving because a predator had stepped through. Aunt Teresa came closer. Her voice had that artificially sweet lift it always got when she sensed someone of value. So how do you two know each other again? Mark glanced at me and then back at her. Delilah was one of the most valuable members of my analytics team. Honestly, I relied on her more than most of my senior execs. Smart, composed, always 2 steps ahead. I smiled faintly. The caramelized onion dip sat untouched behind me. Somehow it didn't matter anymore. I had no idea, Teresa said quickly, her voice thinner. We always knew she was good with computers or data or something in tech. Right. Angela perked up. Wait, you were her boss? You mean like the Mark Hastings? Mark gave a modest shrug, as if the name didn't ring across half the marketing industry. I try to stay under the radar. Jamie, the cousin who'd made the corporate cat lady joke, was chewing silently now. His beer was sweating in his grip. He didn't say a word. We walked to the table slowly. Mark moved with that kind of purposeful grace that made people adjust their posture around him. I'd seen him do this in meetings command a room with silence. Now he was doing it at the picnic table next to the ketchup bottle and half-melted ice. Teresa, suddenly generous, waved at the 2 chairs near the center. Sit here, please, Delilah. You too, honey. I sat down next to him, the same chair that had been saved for Jamie earlier. Mark looked around the spread. This is great. Looks like a lot of love went into the food. Oh, it's a tradition, Teresa said. We host every June. Everyone brings something. Family's important to us. I nearly laughed. But instead, I smiled. Yeah, family's everything. He turned to me quietly. You okay? I nodded once. I could still hear the echo of that first laugh when I arrived, the one where my future had been a punchline. So what are you working on now? Angela asked. She had shifted from disinterested scroll to front-row curiosity. Her fiancé still hadn't said a word, but his body had subtly rotated to face us. Oh, I said. We're collaborating on a new venture. A few marketing firms merged under a new umbrella. Mark's heading strategy. I'm leading the integration side. I didn't add that my salary had tripled, or that I was now managing people like the one who used to undermine me in meetings. That would come later, if it came at all. Mark leaned back in his chair and said it for me. She's effectively running operations across 3 cities. Angela's mouth dropped slightly. Wait. What? He continued without blinking. New York, LA, and Singapore. Not small projects. She's doing what it usually takes a team of 5 to manage. I reached for a napkin, pretending to blot invisible sweat. My heart was doing somersaults, Not because of the praise I'd earned that, but because of the expression on my family's faces, like they were recalculating who I was in real time. Suddenly, the same people who forgot to save me a plate at last year's BBQ were trying to remember every birthday I ever had. Jamie cleared his throat. So, how did you guys meet? Again. Mark turned. At the Quarterly Growth Summit in Denver. She asked a question during Q&A, and I remember thinking, why isn't she on my team already? We had a long conversation afterward. I watched Jamie process that. His fiancée nudged him under the table. He looked down at his plate, suddenly quiet. For a moment, the clatter of utensils and the squeals of children returned the scene to normal, but the energy wasn't the same. I could feel the tension like static on my skin, somewhere between awe and confusion. Aunt Teresa tried again. So, are you two just colleagues? Or... I let the pause speak. Mark turned to me. Should I answer that I raised an eyebrow? Daring him. He chuckled softly. We're seeing each other. A ripple. It wasn't loud. It was sharper than noise, like the sound of glass cracking quietly under a tablecloth. Oh, Teresa said too quickly. Well, isn't that something? Angela's jaw clenched. Jamie's eyes narrowed. My dad, who had been silent on the far end of the yard with a paper plate balanced on his knee, stood and walked over. He hadn't hugged me when I arrived, hadn't looked up. But now, he stepped into the small circle around our seats. He glanced at Mark. You treat her well? Mark stood, extended his hand. Yes, sir. Very well. My father took it. He didn't say anything else, just nodded. Once. Then turned to me and placed his palm lightly on my shoulder. For a man of few words, that was a benediction. I exhaled. It was strange how a whole life can shift in 1 hour. Years of being the single, quiet one undone by one entrance, not because I wanted their approval, but because the silence had always stung more than the insults. Now they saw me, but only because someone else had first. As the sun dipped behind the neighbor's fence and cast everything in a burnt orange glow, I looked out at the people I grew up with. My cousins, my aunts, my dad, the nephews who barely knew my name. Maybe they'd go back to their lives tomorrow and I'd be a new rumor. Maybe nothing would change. But in that golden moment, they were quiet. I had their attention not for being loud, not for being strange, not for being pitied, but because I had stepped out of their frame. I smiled gently and picked up a rib from the tray beside me. You're not eating? Mark asked. Teasing? I nodded. I think I'm ready now. And just like that, I took a bite. The barbecue stretched on into early evening, but everything felt different after that moment. I moved through the yard like I was newly skinned stillme underneath. But the surface had changed. People looked at me longer, paused before speaking. I didn't know if it was admiration, confusion, or just curiosity. But the old invisibility had lifted like steam off asphalt after rain. Angela came over not long after dinner. She was holding a strawberry popsicle and pretending not to stare. Her phone was tucked away, which already felt like a rare peace offering. So, she began, dragging the word like a fishing line. How long has this been happening? With Mark, I asked. She nodded and licked the popsicle. Couple months, I said. It started after I left the firm. We ran into each other at a conference. One thing led to another. Wow. She tilted her head. So, is it serious? I shrugged. We're seeing where it goes. There's respect. I like that. She nodded slowly, then sighed. You always were kind of mysterious. Mysterious, I laughed. Yeah. Like, growing up, you were always in your own world. You didn't fight for attention like the rest of us. And you never needed anyone's help. I didn't know whether that was a compliment or a subtle jab, but it landed softer than her usual tone. Angela looked down at her shoes. I think we just didn't know how to read you. You always looked like you had a plan, and the rest of us were flailing. I raised an eyebrow. You flailing. You were homecoming queen. I was the girl who forgot Spirit Day. She smiled. Maybe. But I didn't have direction. Not like you did. It struck me then how little any of us had really seen each other. All those family dinners, reunions, sleepovers filled with noise but void of depth. Everyone performing. Everyone protecting their own version of themselves. Do you like him? She asked. I looked over at Mark. He was crouched beside one of the kids, helping him tie a shoe. He had taken off his blazer and rolled up his sleeves. Sleeves I once watched brush across whiteboards in boardrooms. Now they had ketchup stains. I do, I said. Not because he changes how people look at me, but because I don't have to perform around him. He already knows what I'm capable of. Angela was quiet, then, surprising me. She offered a gentle, good. We stood there for a while, watching the last rays of sun filter through the maple trees, casting gold onto the grass of the old home. Later that night, after the sparklers and watermelon slices and the sleepy unraveling of kids into minivans, I helped plan. Teresa was wiping down the table and humming something under her breath when I came in. Let me help, I offered, grabbing a stack of paper plates. Oh, honey, you don't need to, she said, but didn't stop me. We worked in silence for a bit. The only sound was the hush of wind and the rhythmic thumping of napkins. She finally spoke without looking at me. You've done well for yourself. Thanks, I replied carefully. I didn't realize how much, she added. I smiled politely. That's okay. No, it's not, she said. We should have known. We should have asked. Her voice cracked a little, like something old was breaking inside her. I always thought you were fine. Quiet. Yes, but fine. Didn't think you needed anything. I did, I said gently, but not what you think. I didn't need money or attention. I just wanted to be seen, not compared, not dismissed. She looked at me then, fully, the lines in her face deeper in the twilight, but her eyes soft in a way I hadn't seen since I was a kid. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't say anything for a long time, just nodded. That was enough. By the time Mark and I were in the car heading home, the heat had faded from the sky and left behind that cool, whispery summer air that only comes after a long day of memories and smoke. We drove in silence for a while, the radio humming low with an old jazz track. He tapped his fingers on the steering wheel, eyes calm, steady on the road. Was that what you wanted? He asked finally. What do you mean that moment? Walking in like that? Being seen. I stared out the window, watching telephone poles blur by. I didn't plan it to be dramatic. I was tired of them deciding who I was without ever asking. He nodded. I didn't need them to approve of me. I continued, but I needed them to stop erasing me. Mark reached over and took my hand. You were never invisible to me. That sentence sat between us like a soft lantern in the dark. Do you regret coming? I asked. He laughed. Not at all. But I do regret wearing suede shoes to a barbecue. That grass is going to haunt me. I laughed, genuinely now. The kind that comes from deep in the chest. Not polite, not performative. When we pulled into my apartment lot, I didn't get out right away. Neither did he. I think they're going to talk, I said. A lot. Let them, he said. You didn't show up to change their opinions. You showed up because you've outgrown their definitions. I turned to him. Did I really? You're not the side note anymore. Delilah, you're the story. I kissed him then, not out of romance, but out of quiet gratitude. He didn't rescue me. He just stood beside me while I walked back into the storm. That night, I took a shower and let the barbecue smell wash off my skin. I changed into my softest cotton tee, the one I wore when I needed to remember who I was before titles, before projections. Then I stood by the window with a glass of water and watched the city blink its indifferent lights at me. It felt like I had crossed a line I'd spent years pretending wasn't there. And even though I didn't know what came next, for the first time, I wasn't afraid of being seen. I was afraid of fading again. But I wouldn't. Not now. Not ever. The Monday after the barbecue felt like walking back into my real life with someone else's footsteps still echoing behind me. I slipped into my office early 7:15 a.m., before anyone else arrived. That quiet hour, before voices and keyboards filled the space, had always been my sanctuary. I liked the way the morning light sliced through the vertical blinds, carving stripes across my desk and computer screen. I booted up my laptop, sipped black coffee, and stared at the photo frame next to my monitor. It was a picture from 5 years ago, me at a product launch, standing off to the side. The CEO and the senior team were in focus. I was blurred in the corner, holding a clipboard, half turned away. I'd kept it for years, not because it was flattering, but because it reminded me of where I started, what I tolerated, what I was quietly becoming behind the scenes. I opened my inbox. 57 emails, 4 flagged as urgent. I smiled, halfway through replying to a partner in Singapore. I got a ping from Jasmine, one of the newer analysts I had hired 6 months ago. Hey Delilah, do you have 5 minutes for a quick check-in? I think I made a mistake in the trend report. I called her right away. Her voice was tight, anxious, but instead of correcting her, I asked her to walk me through what she saw and how she interpreted it. 10 minutes later, she exhaled audibly. You know, she said shyly, you make mistakes feel survivable. I laughed. I make a lot of them. That's how I learned anything. It felt strange, knowing someone looked up to me the way I used to look at people like Mark, like they had all the answers, like they belonged in rooms I couldn't find the door to. After the call, I leaned back and stared at the ceiling. I thought about what Mark said in the car about not being a side note anymore, about being the story. It didn't feel like that at first. It just felt like surviving. That night, I got a text from my dad. Dinner this weekend. Just you and me. I stared at it for a full minute before replying. Sure. Wear your pick. I'll come to you. That never happened. My father rarely came into the city unless someone was hospitalized or being buried. But I told him about a little Vietnamese place I liked, nothing fancy, just quiet and unpretentious. Saturday came. He arrived in a slightly wrinkled button-down and shoes that looked older than my current lease. He hugged me awkwardly in front of the restaurant, like we were co-workers who'd seen each other outside of work for the first time. We ordered pho. He picked his basil out one leaf at a time, like it was a test. So, he said eventually, that man, Mark. I waited. He's serious. I looked into my bowl. He's respectful. He doesn't need me to be anything I'm not. My dad nodded. That's rare. Silence again. Slurps of broth. Spoons clinking. He finally said, I didn't always know how to raise you. You weren't like your cousins. That caught me off guard. You didn't want praise. You didn't beg for attention. You just did your thing. I thought that meant you didn't need me to say much. I stirred my noodles. Maybe I needed it in a different way. He looked at me then. Really looked. I'm proud of you. I don't say it enough. It hit harder than I expected. I felt it like a thud in my chest. Childhood me, somewhere deep inside, trying not to cry in a booth next to laminated menus and paper chopstick wrappers. Thanks, Dad. He cleared his throat and changed the subject. Back to safe ground property taxes, my car's mileage, the weather in Hanoi where his sister still lived, but I held on to that one sentence. Let it soak in slow. Later that weekend, I was in the middle of watering my balcony plants when Mark called. Got a minute? Always. Do you want to come with me to the retreat next month? The one in Santa Fe? I paused. That's a big thing, isn't it? Yeah, he admitted. But I want you there, not just as a partner in business, but as you. I smiled, setting down the watering can. I'll think about it. He didn't press. That night, I opened my old storage bin under the bed. It held notebooks, postcards, relics of a younger me who still hoped someone would pull her into the spotlight without asking why she stood in the shadows. One notebook had a list, written in my 20s. A wish list of sorts. Be in charge of something real. Speak without apologizing. Have someone say, she changed how we do things. Be loved, but never owned. Get invited, not tolerated. Know when to walk away. I ran my fingers over the ink. Faded, but still legible. I hadn't looked at it in years. And now, I'd done more than I realized. The following week, Angela called. That alone was newsworthy. She never called. Only ever texts or Instagram replies. I'm pregnant, she said the moment I answered. My mouth fell open. What I haven't told anyone yet. You're the first. Me I know. Weird. Right. No, not weird. I'm just surprised. I guess after the barbecue, she said. I realized we don't know each other, and I want to change that. I sat down slowly. Congratulations. Thanks, she whispered. I'm terrified, but also ready. We talked for almost an hour, about hormones and ultrasound dates and the name she wasn't sure about. Then she said something that stayed with me. I used to think your silence meant judgment. Now I realize it was just space. Space to grow. I want to give my kid that too. After we hung up, I stared at the ceiling and thought maybe this was what growth looked like. Not big speeches, not revenge or validation, but small reconnections, conversations we never thought we'd have, moments that stitch back what we once thought torn beyond repair. Later that week, a message popped up on LinkedIn. It was Jamie. Hey, I owe you a better hello. I've been reading up on your work. Impressive. If you're ever open to collaborating on a side project, I'd love to learn from you. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. Thanks. Let's talk soon. And just like that, I realized the joke had ended. The punchline was gone. I was no longer the subject of speculation. I was the one being asked for advice. 2 weeks later, I found myself back at Teresa's house, but this time, it wasn't for a family gathering. She texted me one evening, out of nowhere, thinking of doing a small Sunday lunch. Just the girls. You free? I read the message twice before responding. Sure, what time you? Bring nothing, just yourself. That last part felt loaded, but I didn't question it. When I arrived, the backyard was quieter than usual. No beer coolers, no football playing in the distance, no men shouting over each other about grill technique. Just a folding table under the maple tree, set for 6, with mismatched floral plates and real glasses instead of red Solo cups. Angela was already there, looking radiant and tired in that early pregnancy way, face slightly puffier, hand unconsciously resting on her lower stomach. Teresa stood behind her, slicing strawberries. Aunt Merrill was folding napkins, and my cousin Rosie, who'd flown in from Oregon, was lighting citronella candles. Everyone looked up when I stepped through the gate. Hey, Delilah, Angela said with a soft smile. Glad you made it, Rosie added, waving me over. Teresa turned around, wiped her hands on a dish towel, and walked up to me. She didn't hug me, but she rested her hand on my arm for a second, then led me to the seat beside her. The food was simple quiche, salad, fruit, lemonade with floating mint, and the conversation felt surprisingly natural. No underhanded comments, no pointed questions about my relationship status or salary. It wasn't exactly intimate, but it was lighter. They asked about work, really asked not just to fill silence, but to understand. Meryl wanted to know what it was like working with teams across different time zones. Rosie asked how I balanced being on all the time in a leadership role. You always seemed so composed, she said, even when we were kids, like nothing rattled you. I laughed. Everything rattled me. I just didn't let anyone see it. Angela looked over. That's what I'm trying to learn. How to stay centered when everything's chaos. It's not about staying centered, I told her. It's about knowing when you're not and choosing not to panic about it. Teresa refilled my glass and said quietly, You always had a different kind of strength. I see that now. That moment settled between us like dust after a storm. No fanfare, no tears. Just a small correction to a years-long misunderstanding. When lunch ended, we all lingered, not quite ready to leave. At some point, Meryl started talking about old recipes, and Teresa brought out a photo album none of us had seen in years. There was one picture of me, maybe 10 years old, standing in the corner of the living room, holding a book at a birthday party. Everyone else had cake. I had pages. Angela laughed. Even back then, you were in your own world. I looked at the photo and didn't flinch. I used to feel a pang when I saw those moments, proof of how often I'd been out of sync. But now, I felt something else. Pride. I'd built my world. And now, finally, they wanted a window into it. That evening, Mark and I walked through the farmer's market near my place. The late summer sky was fading to lilac, and the scent of roasted peanuts mingled with tomato vines and fresh bread. I'm impressed, he said, brushing my hand as we walked. With what your family lunch? I glanced at him. I didn't expect it to go that well. I thought I'd have to dodge landmines the whole time. Sounds like they're beginning to see you. Beginning, I echoed. That's a good word. He stopped in front of a stand selling handmade ceramics, picked up a mug with a cracked handle that had been repaired with gold resin. Kintsugi style. You know what I love about this? He said, turning the mug in his hand. They don't throw it out. They highlight the break. The scar becomes part of the design. I smiled. That's beautiful. He bought the mug. Later, back at my apartment. We sat on the floor drinking tea from mismatched cups. Mine had a chip on the rim. His was the one with the golden crack. I watched him trace the edge of it with his finger. You know, I said. I spent so long thinking I had to prove something to them, that if I just became successful enough, respectable enough, loud enough, they'd finally acknowledge me. He looked up. And maybe it wasn't about that at all. Maybe I just needed to stop needing them to see me. Mark set the mug down. Funny how the moment we stop chasing validation is when it shows up anyway. We sat in silence for a long time. Then, gently, he asked, What's next for you? I didn't have an answer right away, but I knew it wasn't more titles or recognition. It was subtler than that. I want peace, I said. Not stillness, not boredom, just peace. The kind you don't have to earn. He nodded. I want to build things that last. I continued. Not for credit, just because I believe in them. And your family, I'll keep showing up, I said, but not begging to be let in. They either walk toward me, or they don't. He raised his tea in salute. to golden cracks and quiet victories. I clinked my chipped mug against his. That week, Jamie finally called. Not a text, an actual call. I wanted to say thank you, he said, for not shutting me down after the LinkedIn thing. I know I've been, well, kind of an ass for years. I leaned against my kitchen counter. Yeah, you have. He laughed nervously. I deserve that. But, I added, you reached out. That counts. I really do want to learn from you, he said. You're doing what I wish I'd had the guts to try, and I respect the hell out of it. I softened. Let's set up a time to talk. We'll figure something out. When we hung up, I stared out the window, watching the lights flicker across the street. A teenager was skateboarding past an old woman walking a dog. Two worlds, side by side, unaware of each other, and yet, both existing, both worthy. The next family event was Teresa's birthday dinner. I walked in alone. Mark was away at a summit. I could have brought someone else, another colleague, even a friend, but I chose to arrive on my own. This time, I didn't feel like a shadow. I didn't scan for who was watching. I didn't measure my worth in reactions. I walked in, set down my gift, and joined the conversation at the table without hesitation. Angela waved me over. Rosie scooted her chair. Meryl saved me a slice of the good cake. And Teresa, without ceremony, leaned in and said, I'm glad you came, sweetheart. I smiled. No reveal, no performance, just a seat at the table that had always been mine. A few days after Teresa's birthday dinner, I received a package at the office. No return address, just my name, handwritten in neat block letters on the label. My assistant, Natalie, dropped it off with a raised eyebrow. Secret admirer. I laughed. Probably another promotional sample, but it wasn't. Inside was a photo album, brown leather, aged, with a little brass clasp. I opened it slowly. The first picture me at 7, sitting on a tire swing behind Grandma's old house, arms crossed and chin raised like I already didn't trust the camera. On the back, in faded pencil, Delilah, summer 98. I turned the page. Another photo me at a school science fair, next to a trifold board about plant cells. I was alone in the frame, smiling but awkwardly, like I didn't know where to put my hands. The caption, she won first place. No one stayed to see it. I kept flipping. Every photo was me. Some I remembered. Some I didn't know existed. Me in the background of other people's celebrations. Me under trees, behind cakes, beside windows. Always a little off-center, always half-lit. And at the very end, tucked into a plastic sleeve, was a short note on lined yellow paper. Delilah. I didn't know I'd been collecting shadows, but I see you now. Teresa and I stared at the words until they stopped shaking in my hands. I don't know what prompted her to send it. Maybe she found them recently and saw them differently. Maybe she finally looked at the corners of the frame instead of the center. Whatever the reason, it cracked something open. For a long time, I'd been carrying the weight of invisibility like it was my own fault. But maybe it wasn't that I failed to shine. Maybe they just never turned their heads. Later that week, I was invited to speak at a women's leadership panel downtown. It wasn't the first time I'd done keynotes before, but this felt different, more personal. The theme was redefining visibility. I wore a deep navy pantsuit, simple gold earrings, and nothing flashy. No armor, just clean lines and confidence. The room was packed. Women in suits, heels, flats, and baby carriers, students, executives, new moms, the kind of audience that vibrated with quiet urgency, the need to be heard. When it was my turn, I stepped up to the microphone and paused for a moment. I spent most of my life being described as quiet. I began. Sometimes mysterious, sometimes standoffish, but mostly just background. Soft chuckles from the front rows. I thought success meant getting louder, taking up space. But the truth is, I didn't need to yell. I just needed to stop shrinking to fit the shape other people made for me. I told them a little about my family, about the barbecue, about arriving with someone unexpected, but more importantly, arriving with myself. I looked around the room and saw heads nodding, eyes welling, not because my story was extraordinary, but because it wasn't. So many of us had been silenced, not by hatred, but by habit, the soft kind of dismissal that adds up over decades. When people don't see you, I said, sometimes you start believing you're not worth looking at, but you are. Even when you are. Even when you're alone. Her clothes swept, but I didn't smile for the audience. I smiled for the girl in those old photos, the one who sat in corners with ideas no one asked about. She'd made it to nothing. A week after the camera, I met Jamie at a cafe near the river. He was on time, clean-shaven, wearing a button-up I hadn't seen since college. We ordered coffee and sat outside, the wind teasing napkins and ruffling his menu. He looked nervous. "I know this isn't an interview," he said, "but I brought my project outline, just in case." I smiled. "I'm glad." He handed it over, 7 pages stapled together, full of notes, sketches, goals. "I've had this idea for years," he said, tapping the page, "but I never thought I was the right person to lead it. Seeing you walk into that barbecue like you owned the lawn, it did something to me. Made me wonder what I've been waiting for." I skimmed the proposal. It was good. Rough around the edges. But the core idea was solid: an app that streamlined tutoring access for underserved high school students. "I want to launch it," he said. "Not for money. For meaning." I looked up at him, this cousin who'd mocked my silence, now asking me how to start speaking his truth. "I'll help," I said. "Really, really. But only if you do the work. I won't carry it for you." He nodded. Grateful. "I don't expect you to." And that was the difference now. They weren't asking me to prove anything. They were asking to learn. Back at the office, Natalie knocked on my door one afternoon. "There's a woman in the lobby asking for you," she said. Didn't give a name. "Says you'll know." I walked out, heels clicking softly on tile. And there, in the waiting area, was Grandma Lien. I hadn't seen her in nearly 2 years. She rarely left her assisted living home, but there she was, wearing her floral cardigan, white hair pulled into its usual tight bun. "Ba Ngoai," I said, stunned. She stood slowly, smiling. "I wanted to see where you work." I rushed to hug her. She was lighter than I remembered, but steady. "I called Teresa," she explained. "Told her I missed my smart granddaughter." She gave me the address. I showed her around, introduced her to staff. She waved at them like a queen on tour, and everyone smiled back, charmed by her presence. When we got to my office, she sat down across from my desk and looked around carefully. "You built this," she said. "Yes." She nodded slowly. "Your mother would be proud." It caught in my throat. I hadn't heard anyone mention my mother in a long time, not seriously. She'd passed away when I was 21. We never had the chance to talk woman to woman, only daughter to mother. Grief had always come quietly, like a roommate who never turned on the lights. "She always said you were strong," Grandma continued. "Even when they didn't notice, she noticed." I swallowed hard. I wish I'd heard her say that. "She didn't say much," Grandma said. "But she watched you like a hawk." She knew you'd be fine. It was the closest I'd ever come to hearing my mother speak from the other side. I leaned back in my chair, blinking fast. Some scars don't fade, but they stop bleeding eventually. Later that night, Mark came over. He brought Thai food and a bottle of wine. Even though I'd told him I had no energy, I figured you'd eat if I was here. I smiled as I let him in, as we sat on the couch, eating in silence. He looked over at me and said, "You've changed. How you walk like someone who doesn't ask permission anymore." I looked at him. I think I stopped waiting. He raised his glass. About time. We toasted quietly, clinked glass to glass. And outside, the city moved on, unaware that something had shifted. Inside me, and in the eyes of everyone who had once looked past me. I started keeping a new journal, not the polished kind with gold trim and quote-laced pages, but a plain, cloth-covered one from the corner bookstore, soft as worn denim and unassuming. I didn't write in it every day, just on the days that felt like edges, those transitional moments where something in me pressed against an old version of myself. The first entry I wrote after Grandma's visit was simple. She said, "Mom watched me like a hawk." I think I've been carrying that sentence around like a small flame in my chest. It doesn't light the whole room, but it's enough to see where I'm going. At work. Jasmine was flourishing. Her confidence had bloomed like something starved for sunlight and finally placed by a window. She volunteered to lead a team call that Friday and sent me a text that morning. "You taught me how to breathe in rooms I used to shrink in. Just wanted to say thank you." I didn't reply right away. I just sat with the weight of it, because I knew exactly what she meant. For most of my 20s, I'd walked into meetings like I was stealing air, like if I took up too much space, someone would call security and say, "She doesn't belong here." Now, people paused when I spoke, not because I was loud, but because they listened. That was the difference. Sunday afternoon, I received a call from Teresa. "Would you be willing to come early to the reunion planning meeting?" she asked. "I want to run something by you." My stomach twitched. I hadn't been part of family event planning since ever. I was always added last minute, like someone realizing they'd forgotten to set a place at the table, but something in her tone was different this time. Not forced, not performative. "Sure," I said. "What time? 11? Just you and me at first." When I arrived, she had already made tea. The dining room table was covered in sticky notes and paper timelines. She had printed out samples of potential event themes, menus, even color palettes for the name tags. "You're really going all out," I said, sitting down. "Well, it's the first time we're doing a full reunion in over a decade," she replied, "and I want it to be done right." She pushed a folder toward me. "I want you to be the speaker." I froze. "What?" "At the dinner. You know, when we do the slideshow and share family memories. I want you to speak." I blinked. "Teresa, why me?" She exhaled, a long breath like she'd been holding it since July. "Because you've lived quietly at the edges of this family for too long, and because you have something to say. And I think everyone needs to hear it. You know how to thread things together. You always have. I just didn't realize it until now." I didn't answer for a long time. Then I whispered, "Okay, I'll do it." She smiled and went back to arranging notes, like she hadn't just handed me a microphone made of ancestral silence. As the reunion approached, I found myself thinking about legacy. Not just what we leave behind, but what we repeat. The jokes we make about each other, the stories we never fact-check, the roles we assign and then forget to change when the person grows. I started drafting my speech slowly, not with bullet points or anecdotes, but with questions. What does a family owe each other? Is it visibility, respect, space? Do we get to rewrite our place at the table, or must we wait to be invited again one night? I called Mark and asked, "What would you say if you had to speak to the people who defined your childhood?" He paused. "I'd probably thank them, and then forgive them, for not knowing who I was." I wrote that down. Not everyone who shaped you did it with cruelty, but even ignorance can leave bruises. The reunion was held at a rented lodge 2 hours outside the city, nestled between pine trees and overlooking a lake that looked like spilled glass under the sky. The building had a vaulted wooden ceiling and huge windows that framed the landscape like a painting. Inside, round tables had been set with white linens, candles, and photo centerpieces, black and white snapshots of our grandparents, great aunts, uncles long gone. I wore a black jumpsuit and flats. No blazer, no badge of professional authority. Just me, in the skin I'd grown into. Before the dinner began, I slipped outside and stood near the lake. My reflection shimmered beneath the surface whole, unbroken, quieter than the version of me they used to remember. Then I heard her voice behind me. "You always did like water," Angela said. I turned to her. "You remember that?" "Yeah. You used to sneak out to the creek during the 4th of July and just sit there with your notebook." I never told anyone. "Why not?" She shrugged. "Because I think I was jealous. I needed a crowd to feel real." "You didn't." I smiled. "I think I needed solitude to know what was real." She nodded. "Whatever it was, it worked." We walked back inside together. When they called my name to speak, the room went still. I stood behind the podium, heart steady. I looked out over the tables, the faces of my past, their hands folded politely, waiting. Teresa smiled. Angela nodded. Jamie raised his eyebrows as if to say, "Go on." Then, I began. "I used to think family was a script you couldn't rewrite, that once they gave you a role, quiet one, single one, serious one, you just played it until the credits rolled." A soft laugh from the back. "But I've learned something different. Family isn't a script, it's a conversation. And sometimes, we just need to start saying the things we were too scared to say." I told them about the photos Teresa had sent me, the ones where I stood half-lit in corners. I didn't do it to shame anyone. I did it to show how easy it is to look past people who aren't demanding attention. I said, "I just ask that we start seeing each other, fully, not just for who we've been, but for who we are now." I didn't cry. I didn't perform. I just spoke. And when I finished, the silence wasn't awkward. It was sacred. They clapped, not politely, not quickly. They clapped because they saw me. Really saw me. Afterward, Jamie hugged me. Teresa kissed my cheek. Rosie handed me a tissue and said, "That was the most honest thing anyone said in this family in years." Later, back at the lodge room I was sharing with Angela, we sat on the floor in pajamas, eating leftover cake with plastic forks. "You know," she said between bites, "I used to think I knew you, but now I think I only knew the outlines." "Same," I said. "I thought you were all noise and popularity, and now I know you're terrified to be a mom but brave enough to do it anyway." We laughed, and it felt like something closed gently around us. Not a door, a circle, a loop finally completing. I slept deeply that night, dreamless, at peace with being seen, and with all the years I wasn't. 2 weeks after the reunion, life settled back into its usual rhythm, but something had shifted, not dramatically, not like a door slamming open, but more like a window quietly sliding wider, letting in a breeze I hadn't known I needed. At work, I felt it in the way people addressed me. Jasmine invited me to mentor 2 of her interns. My department head, Allison, Forwarded a client proposal with a single sentence. This needs your voice. And Mark watched it all happen with quiet pride, but never stepped in to take credit. That was the thing I loved most about him. He never used my light to cast a shadow for himself. One morning, I sat in a team meeting and caught myself watching the younger women on my team. Their energy, their speed, their eagerness to prove themselves reminded me of who I used to be: cautious, composed, always overprepared. They asked questions I never would have dared. They wore bright lipstick and bold shoes. They interrupted when they needed to, apologized when they didn't. I admired that. But more than that, I wanted to protect it. After the meeting, I emailed HR and volunteered to launch a mentorship series, monthly roundtables for women across departments. Nothing formal, just space to be seen. They approved it the same day. Back in my apartment, I started rearranging things. Nothing major, just little shifts. I moved the bookshelf closer to the window so the plants could breathe better. I swapped the photo on my desk from the blurry launch party to a picture Angela had taken at the reunion, me, standing at the podium, mid-sentence, eyes open, unafraid. I bought fresh flowers every Sunday now. A new ritual, not to impress anyone, but to remind myself that my space was worth adorning. Mark came over most Friday nights. We didn't talk about the future much. We were still learning the present. But it felt stable, unforced. There were no games, no performances, just conversations and shared silence. "You're quieter lately," he said one evening as we folded laundry together. "Is that a problem?" "No. It's different. Not the heavy kind of quiet, the grounded kind." I thought about that. I think I finally have enough space inside me. I don't need to fill it all with noise. He leaned over, kissed my cheek. That's a good kind of quiet. The family text thread had changed too. Teresa started sending pictures from old albums. Jamie dropped in links to articles about education reform, clearly hoping to impress me now that he was trying to launch his tutoring app. Even Uncle Gary chimed in with a rare, "Delilah, your speech made me rethink some stuff. Proud of you." I didn't need it, but I accepted it, because sometimes healing isn't about confrontation. It's about allowing change to arrive in imperfect packages. One day, out of nowhere, Angela sent me a video. I opened it while riding the train home from work. It was a grainy clip from years ago. Me, age 11, standing in Grandma Lean's kitchen, reading a poem I'd written aloud to the family. My voice was small, a little shaky. The room behind me was noisy, people talking, plates clinking, but I kept reading. At one point in the video, the camera shifted, and for a second, you could see my face pause, just long enough to register that no one was really listening. I watched my younger self blink, then lower the paper slowly. The video ended there. Angela had written, "I'm sorry we didn't hear you then. We hear you now." I sat with that on the train. The reflection of the city blurred behind me in the window. My throat tightened, not from pain, but from the strange ache of recognition. The world hadn't been cruel to me. It had simply been loud, and I had been quiet. But now, the volume had changed. On a quiet Sunday morning, I visited Grandma Leanne. I brought Vietnamese coffee and sesame pastries from her favorite bakery. She was sitting in the garden courtyard of her assisted living center, wrapped in a thick shawl despite the sun. "You look peaceful," I said, setting the tray beside her. "I am," she replied. "I watch the same squirrel steal the same bread every morning. He thinks he's clever, but I let him have it." I laughed. "That sounds like mercy." "It's just softness," she said. "Old age turns sharpness into softness. It has to." I sipped my coffee. "I'm trying to soften too." "You're not old," she said, squinting at me. You're just learning to be still." We sat there for a while, watching the light shift on the garden wall. She told me stories about my mother's small ones, like how she used to cry behind the shed when she got overwhelmed, or how she hated the sound of shoes squeaking on tile floors. She was sensitive, Grandma said. Like you. I nodded. I used to think that was a weakness. She reached for my hand. Then you were taught wrong. Her grip was dry and strong and full of something I can only describe as ancestral approval. That night, I opened my journal again. I wrote. They used to laugh at the idea of me ending up alone. They didn't know how rich solitude could be. They didn't know you could be alone and deeply loved at the same time. They don't joke anymore. And I don't explain. The next work trip was in Santa Fe. Mark and I flew in separately, he from New York, me from LA, and met at the Adobe-style resort where the conference was held. It was our first time traveling as something more than colleagues, less than defined. That evening, after the panels were over, we walked the perimeter of the property. The air was desert cool, and the mountains were blushing under the sunset. "Do you ever miss being unknown?" I asked him. He took a moment. "Sometimes, but not the part where I had to fight to be heard, just the part where I didn't have to explain myself to anyone." I nodded. I used to think anonymity was safety. Now I think it was just invisibility with better branding. We stopped by a bench overlooking the horizon. Mark turned to me. "You know, if I hadn't met you as a colleague first, if I'd met you at that barbecue without knowing anything about you, I still would have noticed you." Why, he smiled. "Because you're not loud, but you're not quiet either. You're precise." That's what I saw. Someone who doesn't waste words. Someone who's always listening. I leaned my head against his shoulder, and together, we watched the sky turn indigo. No labels, no declarations, just presence. And that was enough. The last leaves of autumn had just begun to fall when I walked into Teresa's house again. This time, it was for something quiet, a potluck lunch. No theme, no occasion. Just a check-in. She'd called it. That was new, her inviting people without an official banner. I brought miso-glazed eggplant and jasmine rice. She greeted me at the door with a soft smile and warm eyes, the kind that said more than any words ever could. We didn't hug, we still weren't that kind of family, but her hand brushed my shoulder lightly as I passed, and somehow, that was more intimate. The dining room was already half full, Angela with a baby bump much more obvious now, Rosie in an oversized sweater pouring lemonade, and Aunt Meryl holding a pie like it was sacred. Everyone looked up when I entered. There was a slight hush. Not awkward, just expectant. "You're here," Angela said. "Good. We saved you the chair by the window." I slipped into the seat. The view overlooked the backyard now blanketed in crisp gold leaves. The grass, still holding on to the last of summer's green, was littered with acorns. "This might be the last weekend we can sit outside," Teresa said, setting down a bowl of salad. "Next week it's supposed to snow." Angela groaned. "I'm not ready. None of my maternity coats fit yet." We laughed gently. Even the air between us had changed, fewer thorns, more threads. Lunch was simple rice, roasted vegetables, baked chicken, bread that was slightly overdone but still soft in the middle. No one asked invasive questions. No one made jokes at anyone's expense. It was the kind of gathering I'd always wished for without ever believing I'd experience it. "Remember those photo albums you sent me?" I asked Teresa quietly as we cleared plates. She looked up. "I do. I've been thinking about them. About all the pictures where I wasn't really part of things." Her face stiffened slightly. Not defensive, more like bracing. "I don't blame you," I said. "Not anymore. I wonder how many people live their whole lives at the edge of the frame, waiting to be pulled in. She sighed. Too many. We didn't say anything else. We didn't have to. That afternoon, after dessert, we moved to the living room. Someone had started a fire. Jamie arrived, wind-blown flush, with an apology and 2 cartons of fresh apple cider. He looked at me as he poured cups. Can I steal you for 5 minutes after this? Sure. We stepped out onto the porch. It was cold now, really cold. My breath fought in the air. He handed me a cup of cider and leaned on the rail. I pitched to my first investor last week. He said, didn't get a yes, but I didn't fall apart either. That's huge. Thanks to you, he said. I shook my head. No, you did that. He nodded. But I wouldn't have started without seeing you walk into that BBQ like a woman who already knew the ending to the joke. I smiled. The joke's not funny anymore. No, he said, lifting his cup. It's not. We drank in silence for a bit, watching a squirrel dart across the lawn. He turned to me again. I want to say this before the moment passes. I'm sorry. For all the years I treated you like you were invisible. For the comments. For the eye rolls. For never asking what you actually cared about. I looked at him. Really looked. Jamie wasn't perfect. He'd made his share of mistakes. But in that moment, he was someone different. Someone trying. I forgive you, I said. But more importantly, I'm not carrying it anymore. His shoulders dropped. Just slightly. Thanks. Delilah. I nodded. You're welcome. Back home, I curled up with a blanket and a book I'd been trying to finish for weeks, but I didn't get past the first few pages. My mind kept drifting back to the porch, the lunch table, the old photos. The way Meryl had pulled me aside earlier just to say, "You looked so happy today. I like that version of you." Version. As if I were a draft that had finally been updated. Mark called just as I was setting the book down. How was the potluck, he asked. Surreal. Good surreal or bad surreal? Quiet surreal? No spotlight, no performance. Just people trying, maybe for the first time, to be kind without agenda. He paused. That's something. It is. Are you okay? I thought about that. And for once, the answer wasn't complicated. I am good, he said, because you deserve the kind of peace that doesn't expire when the party ends. I smiled. You always say the right thing. I say the honest thing. He replied. That's different. Later that night, I cleaned out the last untouched box in my closet. It was labeled college. Inside were notebooks, cheap jewelry, printed syllabi from classes I no longer remembered. At the bottom was a single page torn from a spiral notebook. In shaky handwriting, it read, I don't know what I'm supposed to become, but I know it has to be louder than the silence I grew up with. I sat with that for a long time. She didn't know yet that silence could be powerful, that sometimes what looks like shrinking is actually listening, that some people bloom late because they were too busy surviving to be seen. But she was right about one thing: I did become something louder, not in volume, in presence. That page went into my new journal, a reminder of who I was when no one else was watching. The next day, I visited the bookstore and picked up a copy of a novel Angela had mentioned at lunch. When I got to the checkout, I added a second copy. I didn't think much of it until I got home and saw Jamie's name flash on my phone with a simple text. Hey, want to do a sibling book club with Angela and me? Just us 3. I stared at it, smiling. 3 months ago, I wouldn't have believed it. But now, it didn't feel strange. It felt like gravity finally balancing itself. I'm in, I replied. Let's start with chapter 1. And just like that, A new story began, one that wasn't built on jokes or roles or survival. One where I was fully in the frame, laughing and turning the page. The first snow fell on a Tuesday morning, light, feathery. The kind that barely sticks but makes the world feel hushed and suspended. I stood by my window, coffee in hand, watching the flurries drift past the glass. In the silence, I felt something settle. Not an ending, not a triumph, just a soft, private arrival. It had been months since that barbecue. Months since I'd walked into a space that never held room for me and laid down the quiet truth of who I'd become. And now, as the city outside slipped into its winter costume, I realized I didn't feel the need to be seen anymore. Not because I had been seen, but because I had finally seen myself. That afternoon, I had lunch with Natalie and Jasmine in the office kitchen. We sat by the window, plastic containers and mismatched mugs spread across the small round table. "I heard your cousin launched his app last week," Jasmine said, nudging me with a smile. "He posted about it on LinkedIn and tagged you." "Yeah," I said, smiling. "He sent me the beta to test." Natalie raised her eyebrows. "So now you're not just mentoring interns, you're mentoring cousins." I laughed. "Apparently." Jasmine leaned forward. "Can I say something weird?" "Always?" She lowered her voice slightly. "You've changed." Natalie nodded in agreement. "It's like you were always composed, always professional, but now there's this ease, like you're not proving anything anymore." I blinked, surprised by how clearly they'd noticed. "I guess," I said slowly. I stopped needing approval from people who never really understood me, and when I did that, the right people found their way to me. "Like us," Jasmine teased. I grinned. "Exactly like you." They smiled. We shared our sandwiches and stories about bad dates and annoying client emails, and the conversation didn't orbit around anyone's title. It was the kind of ease that only arrives when no one's performing. Later that day, I found an email in my inbox from my father. Subject line: "Thoughts after the reunion." Inside was just one sentence: "I didn't realize I'd missed so much of your life until I watched everyone else listen to you." It wasn't emotional, it wasn't poetic. But for my father, that sentence was a revolution. I sat with it for a long time. Then I replied, "I'm still here. You can be part of it now, if you want." That weekend, I went back to the lake, the one from the reunion lodge. It was quieter in winter, the trees bare, the water dark and still. No more reflections of parties or speeches, just silence, and I liked it that way. I sat on a bench wrapped in my coat, notebook in my lap, and wrote. There was a time when I thought love had to be loud, when I believed recognition came from applause, and that healing needed an audience. But now I understand love is often invisible. Recognition is sometimes whispered. And healing shows up in the way you sit with yourself and no longer flinch. I didn't write anything after that. I just watched the trees sway gently in the wind. Angela's baby was born a month early, a girl. They named her Mai, after Grandma Lian's middle name. I drove to the hospital on a gray afternoon, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers and a handmade blanket I'd ordered weeks ago from a local artisan shop. When I stepped into the room, Angela was half asleep, and Mai was in her arms, tiny, red-cheeked, wrapped like a poem in a cotton swaddle. She looked up when she saw me. "She's real," Angela whispered. I walked over slowly. "She's beautiful." Angela adjusted the blanket. "Do you want to hold her?" I hesitated. Years of being the outsider had trained my muscles to freeze at invitations, but I stepped forward and took the baby gently. She was light, warm, breathing in soft, rhythmic puffs. "She's so quiet," I said. Angela smiled, "Just like you." We sat there for a while. No one spoke. The hospital hallway sounds melted into the background, just the beeping machines and this small, perfect breath of a child asleep in my arms. At the next family dinner, things were different. There was no grand reveal, no performance, no jokes about being single or childless. I walked in, set down my roasted cauliflower dish, and was greeted with smiles that didn't feel rehearsed. Jamie asked me how the mentorship program was going. Meryl offered me the seat next to her without hesitation. Even Uncle Gary passed me the bread before asking for anything himself. I wasn't the center of attention, but I wasn't invisible. I was just there, fully, quietly, belonging. Teresa sat across from me at the table, carving a chicken breast as we spoke about spring travel plans and books. At one point, she looked up and said, "I'm glad you came. I always came." I said, "You just didn't always see me." She winced slightly. "I know. And I'm sorry." I nodded. "It's okay. We're here now." She squeezed my hand, and I believed her. Mark and I didn't label things. We didn't need to. We saw each other on good days and bad, in silence and in joy. Some evenings, we'd sit on the balcony with wine and no words at all. Other nights, we'd talk for hours about everything from history to our worst childhood haircuts. One night, he said, "You know what I admire about you most. What you never burned the bridge. You just built a better one." I thought about that. Maybe, but sometimes it still hurts. Of course it does. But pain that's been named is easier to carry. I looked out at the city skyline. I don't think I needed revenge. I just needed to be whole. He leaned in and kissed my temple. "You are." And so, this is how it ends, not with applause, not with a grand speech or a crowd gasping in revelation, but with a dinner where no one comments on my relationship status, a newborn who sleeps peacefully in my arms, a cousin who builds something from scratch because he finally knows he can, a sister who calls me when she needs advice, not permission, a father who shows up quietly, not perfectly, and a man who sits beside me without needing to rescue me. This is not the end of the story. It's just the part where I finally arrive in my own life, not as a side character, not as a punchline, but as myself. Seen, known, enough.